yourselves here real quick.
Very good. Jim, you want to go first?
Sure. So my name is Jim Jung. I've known Jim Nagy for a lot of years. We're from the same hometown, and I've been blessed with a background that's kind of grown from a lot of distribution experience in the automotive aftermarket and in the automotive market, and really moved into a little higher tech field. And I don't want to say it wrong, but in a fairly big way, we arguably got into the top 5 internet service providers in the nation at one point, and that was out of Detroit, which isn't an ISP market. And I co-founded an internet service provider there. So I have a fairly varied background. At a young age, I was able to get a lot of different experiences, had some great mentors. And I got involved with Justin several years ago, and this just became a passion. I'm not an engineer. I am a good development person. I have a family full of engineers. We're German. My uncle was an engineer, senior VP of engineering for the old Pullman railcar company of all things. So that's a pretty interesting coincidence. But we're really working, and we're really poised to go ahead and implement this technology so we can bring a lot of advantages to the whole logistics world, and with a combination of an energy and logistics project. Justin?
Yes, Jim, thanks for that introduction. And, listening to him, it's difficult for me to not want to add a whole bunch more onto it, because, how can you get a really good bio on somebody in just a few seconds? But one of the things he left out was his company actually built the first e-commerce store for Microsoft back in the 90s. So they accomplished a lot. And when I was introduced to Jim, it was one of those, moments where your kind of hair stands on end and you say, wait a minute, I needed to meet this person for some reason. And it was quite a few years ago, but we have been through proposals all over the world together. And this one is by far the most exciting because of the immediate potential for the TEXOMA region. My background real quick, my parents, my dad is an American farm boy from Tennessee who moved to Detroit when he was 16 years old, joined the Army, met my mom in England. She moved to the United States. And if you ever saw the show Green Acres, that kind of is like an image of what my parents were like. Very interesting combination. They gave me the tools I needed to rationalize a lot of things, including the computer industry, which, because I'm a computer guy, I became a computer integration specialist for IBM in the 1990s. We did a lot of groundbreaking, bleeding edge stuff. I believe we're still the only company to ever get an IBM voice recognition system in a mission critical environment at a hospital. That was in the 90s. So we did a lot. And in 1995, this proposal came to me, and I realized early how important it was after seeking some consultation. So we did 7 years of private R&D and published in the year 2002. And the state of Michigan passed 2 unanimous resolutions that were read on the floor in Congress to have this as the standard for sustainable logistical infrastructure for the United States in general, as an upgrade to the interstate highway network. So it's been a wild ride since 2002. Our company has grown. We have quite a few members. And with that, I want to hand back to Jim Jung, our CEO, to run through this presentation. Thank you.
Jim, before you get started, I just wanted to make a couple more comments. For all of you on the engine team, I think what you're going to find here is in terms of what Khalid Abdelghani has been calling a big idea, this is a really, really big idea that I think can really transform logistics in the region. And so please come into this with an kind of an open mind and start thinking about all of the different innovations that can be attached to what they're going to be presenting today, because I really think that we can tie so many of the different things we've been discussing to this project. So with that, Jim, do you want me to go ahead and start the video?
Sure. Yeah, let's start with that, and then we'll just go through the presentation in pretty quick fire mode and leave time for Q&A.
Okay, here we go.
The Interstate Traveler Hydrogen Superhighway is a modular maglev rail system that is laminated with solar panels which create enough power to operate all the basic systems for transportation, communications, security, water and sewer, and other utilities. This is facilitated by the large conduit cluster contained within the central support of the beam that supports the maglev rail system. The conduit cluster can be used for virtually any liquid and vapor-based materials. Multiple conduits will also be dedicated for fiber optics, for communications, and superconducting electrical cables for power distribution. The unique integration of components described above creates a self-sustaining solar-powered energy production and distribution system that is used to propel thousands of transport vehicles on the rail and produce hydrogen and raw electrical energy to power traditional wheeled vehicles on the roadways and supply hydrogen as a fuel to the growing aerospace industry in the coming decades. The suspension system for the magnetically levitated traveler transports has the ability to adapt to G-forces on the fly so that passengers will feel a greatly reduced sense of lateral movement that is felt when accelerating, decelerating, and banking. Also, the suspension system enables the optimization of aerodynamics to employ the fuselage as a wing to generate lift and reduce the energy required to levitate the transports and increase the available power for propulsion. The expected performance of this system should allow a full champagne flute to stand on a table virtually undisturbed during normal operations. The goals and expectations for national security include transportation reliability and safety, along with resilient municipal infrastructure that is not easily damaged by typical annual weather systems and earthquakes. The Traveler meets all of these attributes, providing also a means with which to organize and optimize hundreds, if not thousands, of transports for emergency relief operations, such as the evacuation of large districts of people in harm's way from hurricanes and floodwaters. The transportation diversity opportunity created by the Traveler Rail enables an open platform where virtually any type of transport can be devised for virtually any purpose. Starting with the public transit transports, freight transports, and personal automobile transports for you and your car, there will also be mobile hospitals with a full complement of emergency medical response services, along with private and commercial transports for mobile restaurants, corporate and executive transports for business meetings, fleet services for large public venues crafted to promote the home team professional sports organizations to help pack the house with public transportation. Finally, the new national network of Traveler stations will lay the foundation for thousands of new leasehold franchise businesses that will serve the travelers, provide the best public restroom facilities anywhere in the world, and gainfully employ thousands of people for generations to come.
So Terry, I just want to thank you for putting this together and thank everyone on this call. I mean, this is an esteemed group that you've put together in the TEXOMA region for this innovation engine. And it's the big names. You guys are totally real and we're ready to go. So I'm going to move on and go to the next slide, please. And you're going to have basically from us 3 speakers today. I'll be speaking Chris Fetters, who's with Louisiana, the CEO of Louisiana 23 Development Company, and then Justin as well. Next slide.
Jim, just one point I want to make on that
Yeah.
slide for everybody. Chris Fetters is also signed on as a collaborator for the engine. So just wanted to make that point.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
And may I ask, can everyone see the presentation? Because I cannot.
Yep, I can see it.
I can see it too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, I can.
All right,
I
please
can see it.
proceed. Sorry for the interruption.
Okay. So we have a simple agenda. We've taken a 4-minute animated ride on the system. We're going to do a couple other things. Justin was real fortunate to get in with the U.S. Air Force and the Department of Defense, so much so that he's been a special guest speaker in keynote roles quite a few times. And the information that we're going to cover here is information that allows officers in the DoD to receive continuing education credits. We'll cover some grant application excerpts, and we'll have some remarks on hydrocarbons and hydrogen. And then Dr. Poland will facilitate a Q&A. So we'll get through the other stuff as fast as we can move it. There'll be a lot of information at you, but this is being recorded as well. So this is going to be legacy available to you as well. Next, please. Next slide. So Justin did one heck of a job getting close to resources at the United States Air Force early on. He really got in under the tent. They came to him to talk about what in the DoD really has, from a technical standpoint, a desire to move toward hydrogen. They have 3 really main reasons to do it. They get 3 times the range on their aircraft when they replace, for instance, JP8 jet fuel with hydrogen, because they get rid of the weight of the carbon. They have no carbon buildup on the engine, so their preventive maintenance schedules get better and easier, and it's better on the equipment. And they don't have soot trails to work to mitigate as well when they're utilizing hydrogen. So Justin ended up working with the Hawaii Center for Advanced Transportation Technology and the Advanced Power Technology Office in Hawaii. They did a demonstration making hydrogen from a process where they could make a fair amount of hydrogen, and they ended up fueling ground support vehicles from there. But hydrogen has been around for a long time in the Department of Defense, and you'll see a little bit of that more later. Joint Base Pearl Harbor has had us speak out there. Justin's had roles and been close to that group. They've been doing their real work at Joint Base Pearl Harbor at Schofield Barracks with a solar field and making hydrogen from electrolysis. Next slide, please. So in those CEC programs that he would do with the DoD, there's 3 main primary learning objectives that were covered: the history of hydrogen, transportation logistics, the hydrogen superhighway as a smart grid, and essentials of a public-private partnership. Next slide. You can go to the next one too. Just a real simple primary building block of all matter is hydrogen. And hydrogen is the most abundant element in the universe. It's the first element on the periodic table, and it's the lightest element. And normally on Earth, it's coming out of the ground tied to carbon as a hydrocarbon, but it's most present on Earth as H2O in water. Next slide. Hydrogen was isolated for the first time in 1671 by Robert Boyle. There's exhaustive research on this topic. The wiki link that you'll have in the leave behind available to you is on the bottom. Next slide. This gentleman is actually the godfather of modern chemistry. He's the inventor of the periodic table. This is just a picture of some of his laboratory instruments way back in the 1780s. The next slide. Montgolfier was the very first to have a hot air balloon, and that was in 1783, but it needed a very large balloon. And it needed hot air, so you had to heat it. And they couldn't control this thing. This went up in Versailles in France way back at that time. And when they couldn't control it, it crashed, and it was literally attacked by the populace with pitchforks. So move on to the next slide. just 3 months later, Jacques Charles launched a hydrogen balloon in 1783. It's a smaller balloon, no hot air is needed. He used hydrogen to lift the balloon. They could control it much easier. And that was the start of hydrogen, being utilized a little more. Next slide. Just a picture of that balloon. You can go to the next slide, please. The first hydrogen engine that powered a car was in 1807. That was in Switzerland. Next slide. The Hipmobile was invented in 1863. This was an internal combustion engine vehicle that burned hydrogen to propel it, and about 400 of the Hipmobiles were sold. Then the next, we go to the modern era. BMW, this is a picture of their V12 internal combustion hydrogen engine. Next slide. Just a picture of the engine itself. In the next slide, there's a GM high-wire vehicle that's in the Henry Ford Museum. Next slide. A hydrogen Ford pickup. Next slide. Just the V10 engine in that pickup. Next slide. In the automotive vehicle industry, heavy automotive stuff as well, anything that's moving, all of the major manufacturers of engines in the world are ready to go with hydrogen engines. Toyota is, in our book, probably the absolute leader. They've taken a stance that they're really happy about where hydrogen can go forward, but they're doing EVs as well. But they're the biggest EV manufacturer, and they really want a hydrogen future. I won't bore you with some of the articles that are out from the chairman of the board of Toyota, et cetera. But Hyundai, all the US market are all ready to go with hydrogen, but the missing link is there's no large-scale infrastructure to provide needed hydrogen. And the hydrogen superhighway does that in a clean, renewable manner. We can store it and distribute it. Alan Mulally went on record when he was the CEO of Ford quite some years ago and said Ford is very bullish on hydrogen in a Forbes interview. Hyundai did a ride across America just to make a clear statement that they are ready to go. Toyota has made over 22 patents available to share royalty-free up to at least 2030 on hydrogen, trying to really help the impetus of this go forward. Next slide. And then, of course, from a military and aerospace standpoint, the Blackbird was designed to run on hydrogen. It's running a lot on jet fuel, but it's certainly designed to run on hydrogen. Next slide. The Saturn rockets did the same. Next slide. The space shuttle, the same. Next slide. Our hypersonic scramjets are able to run on hydrogen and really give them excessive power. Next slide. This is just a picture of a scramjet down at Edwards Air Force Base. On the next slide, Justin got so close to the DoD that they were using him as a resource in these webinars as well, and personal presentations. And they would take the time to go through and surf the information that had been declassified related to hydrogen and the DoD. And this slide isn't too many years old, and it shows 1,630 hydrogen-powered jet aircraft. Those declassified documents have already climbed to over 2,600. So the military has been on this path for quite a while, and they've brought us in to try to help encourage the commercial markets moving to this path because they understand hydrogen as well as anyone. Next slide. Next slide. So the system is designed to upgrade the interstate highway network, as Justin said, but I want to say it's so much more. This system can go on any applicable right-of-way, be it national rights-of-way, state right-of-ways, county right-of-ways, local right-of-ways, private roadways, railroads. Power line corridors are a great place for this to go. and it can make the power line corridor safer and more protected, and private land. So the system has a superior turning radius. It's not a big turning radius like you have with a typical railroad group out there. These vehicles can turn within a 90-foot radius, a 60-foot if you really want to push it. And there's no base roads that we need to put this system up, to develop it, to make it grow, because we'll show you why. So in a few slides. So let's go to the next slide. So this is a transportation system. It's a solar energy collection grid. It's a municipal conduit system for commodity type community resources that are needed every day. It produces hydrogen in its production and can distribute. It's an energy storage system, and again, distributing it. Wireless internet access and fiber optics all along the way. And this is a millions of tons stainless steel project, many thousands of jobs for our national economy. Next slide. This is a little more close up. I'll spend just a little bit on the infrastructure itself. You see that there's a passenger transport on top of this. It rides on magnetic packed rails. And the arms coming out of that passenger transport have motors on them that have the articulating arms that smooth the G-forces out. But those motors have an opposing magnetic nacelles in them. You can remember as kids, if we were pushing two magnets together, to try to get them together was a task, and they go off. And when you apply electricity to magnets and they become electromagnetic, the forces can be very powerful. All of the parameters of our maglev rails and designs, and we've tweaked the design as well over the years, all have been completely computer vetted. And the motors that Justin has designed are just very, very strong. And, you know, slotted linear motors aren't really real, but the design of this is, and the advantage for safety is that these motors wrap around these rails so they're not going to derail as well, so we can be done with that. We're above grade, so it's truly high speed without jeopardizing any people that might try to jump a track or a vehicle jumping a track. We're up above grade. These stanchion poles that hold this system up typically would be about 35 foot high, but we can place them so we can take care of the undulations easier in the topology that we run across. The solar panels are designed to be, as solar panels continue to improve in efficiency, when the volumes get up enough in new designs that we can strip and replace and go to newer designs. But there's very efficient solar panels out there now. And the conduit cluster, certainly everybody needs water. Sewage can go through here. Everybody needs fiber optics, and all those things can go through, but so can virtually any other liquid or gaseous items as well, and electrical distribution in this conduit cluster. The box beam that surrounds it is very rugged. It's thick. It can be thicker in places where it requires it to be thicker. And I'd like to just go ahead and move on to the next slide. This is just a picture of the solar skin. Next. Logistically, this is very large infrastructure. You know, we've been sitting on railroads that are 4 feet 8 inches wide from the inner rail to the inner rail since two mules got together, and that's how the width of tracks, a lot of its snow was the standard, and that's still been the standard. This is 12-foot gauge from inner circular rail or pyramid-like rail from inside to inside. So it's very large infrastructure. It's over 2.5 times wider than standard gauge railway. Let's go to the next slide. The variety of vehicles really is endless. These vehicles can be tailored to anything that someone would want. We can carry people with their vehicles, vehicles without people in them. Freight containers. In this system, the freight containers are standardized ISO units that go side to side. So there's 2 of them on that in that unit that you see down in the lower left. And then these can be public, they can be private, they can be for lease, partial leases, lease out the leases. They can be bought to own by companies. They can carry their own advertising, etc. So let's go to the next slide. That's just a quick picture of the passenger transport a little closer up. Next slide is the side-by-side freight transports. And the next slide is a private car transport. And let's go to the next one, because in the private car transport, we have active floor restraints designed. So the vehicle can go in and those cylinders just come up, hold the wheels in place. You can bring along some additional freight as well if you've got a smaller car or SUV in one of these transports. So you can bring a lot of things with you. Go to the next slide. Think of this infrastructure and the vehicles on it, the full-scale 12-foot gauge, as a very large city bus. If conditions call for it, we have a half-scale model that's a 6-foot gauge, which can be even good for cities that have little room, like in Europe, where they may want to upgrade some transportation needs. Next slide. Here's where it gets pretty amazing and exciting. We do have the capacity to take on full 18-wheelers with their cabs onto the vehicle, and we scoot it over into the cab. It goes down the road. It can go with the drivers, or it can pick up a driver at the other end. These vehicles typically, transport vehicles typically, just from a common sense standpoint, will run about 250 miles an hour. They can go quicker than that. Quite frankly, the slotted linear motor designs, this system will take something straight up and down like a carnival ride, but that's not how it's going to be used. They're very powerful, but we can take a lot of large scale stuff in this. Aggregate can go in containers as well for choices. So let's go to the next slide. I think this is really near and dear to Justin's heart, and this is to have some really nice travel options available to whatever companies, people that want to take trips. These can be designed as austere as someone would like, or as luxurious as someone would like. Next slide. This is really, I know, important to Justin. You know, we've all heard about the golden hour that's critical to save lives. So this is a triage traveler, which is outfitted with some basic emergency medical services, and to help get people that are out on the road, get to them quicker, be able to get services started, be able to get them within closer to that golden hour of life-saving support. Next slide. This is along the same line, but it's a bigger, better fitted hospital that's capable of surgeries, different emergency services, recovery services. You see that there's even an EMS vehicle in here. So just the variety of things it can do, the system can handle it. Next slide. We talked about installation just briefly to say we don't need base roads. We install this system by a stanchion pole at a time, swinging the crane back, taking a rail section, laying it in place as well. At the top of the stanchion poles, we have a bulwark that ties everything together. We actually have auto shutoff valves there that are pressure sensitive as well. There's a lot of safety precautions in this system. Next slide, please. It's just another picture of the installation crane where you can see the rail sections behind it, just to get a view of how they're picked up and then put into the ground, and the next rail section goes in. Next slide. This is the half-scale model, just to go down a typical suburban boulevard. And some of those boulevards aren't very usable. This makes it usable, gives some protective stuff under it. This system delivers clean water wherever it goes, fiber optics, etc. So there's a lot that people can do to upgrade some things that they want to do aesthetically and access to people. Next slide. Next slide. So this is kind of to drive through the point that small spaces can be used as forward and store buffers. We have side tracks off the system to let people have as much ingress and egress stops as are practical. And when those cars get into that loop, they can just circle, and one car can get in and get out. The other one can circle if they're still waiting on someone that reserves something, while everybody that wants to bypass that stop is just going to express by it out on the main line. We really envision that over time, this will be dual track laid, but even when it's not dual track, we can put side tracks to let one car, a series of cars pull over while the others take priority to bypass. But we really believe that dual tracking will be a good solution for the nation. It has Department of Defense ramifications as well. I'll talk about that a little bit in a minute. So let's go to the next slide. That's just a little better view of what the side track looks like. You saw in the animation that there's a switch that lets people into the side track, etc. So you can get a better view of it. Next slide. We do have the ability to do some things where a city or really a quaint spot might want to do things in an at-grade level. These wouldn't be as high speed, but it's as simple as laying mats down on roads or embedding them into the surface where they can be snow plowed and everything with some durable systems. And these have coil mats in them that are magnet levitation that can lift and move the transportation forward. Next slide. That's just another picture view of it. And the next slide, same thing. So next slide, let's talk a little bit about what we do best and go to the next slide. We do clean water. We do clean water generation best from virtually any water source. You can call it brown water, gray water, polluted water, runoff water, salt water, electrolyzes very well, and even sewage if it has enough water content in it. So if there's polluted lakes that can be cleaned up, that water is valuable to us to electrolyze and then come back, and we hold the hydrogen and oxygen separately. When we recombine it, we come back with a clean water source. And if there were some particulate and things in that water, we take care of that. Some of them can be worth money. So you've got some commodities at times in that. Let's go to the next slide. This is a pretty simple process. Electrolysis has been around for a long time, and it's being perfected more and more. We're in the inner circles of that, and this is just a demonstration of that system. I'm not going to get wonky in this right now and go through all that, but what comes out of this is clean water. About every 3 miles, we have a utility substation that has our equipment to do this. It's connected to they're all interconnected by the rail. And the beautiful thing to me about this is, as our world continues to turn into the light every day, we have our electrons. And we take water and separate it. And within these systems, within these utility substations, it's a closed environmental loop, because when we want to make electrons, we burn those electrons in either internal combustion engines, and there's some very, very good ones. Toyota's got some really cool internal combustion engines for hydrogen, or put it through fuel cells. And there's some other varieties of being able to store the way we store our energy. So it's a pretty bright future as long as our world continues to turn into the light every day. Next slide. I want to kind of slow down for just a minute and talk about something that this does for our energy security, for our national security, and some issues that are out there. Some of you may well know what SONET fiber rings are, synchronous optical network rings in the internet. They're also referred to as self-healing rings. I was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time and co-found an internet service provider. And I got to negotiate with WorldCom and UUNet and Metropolitan Fiber Systems, the originators of putting Sonnet fiber rings down. Sonnet fiber rings are just, if you take a round ring, the packets on the internet are going in both directions at the same time. There's an active path and a passive path. One has priority when it's working. If the active path gets cut, the passive path takes over and just takes those packets, and they're already running, but they're going in the opposite direction. Most of the time in the internet, the way these are laid, you don't even lose any of your data at all. So those are done on local markets, then they're tied to regional markets, then they're tied to nationwide networks as well. And it's a fascinating system. And I'd like you to think about this system that's been projected is in a larger scale available for a physical market of other commodities that human beings need, that municipalities need as well. So if this system gets built out, the more that's built out, and we have interoperability in it, if we have a catastrophe somewhere, we just replace that rail section, but while we replace it, we can take all those assets and conduits and energy going through it, and water and sewer and gases and hydrogen at low pressure going through it, and it's still available. So that's why it's also public DoD good policy for us, and it's just good public policy. When there was a power outage that cascaded down that started in eastern Ohio years ago, we had a mess. I mean, the cascade downs happened pretty easily. In our power line corridors, it's kind of a thing that people don't talk about too much publicly, but it doesn't take much of a zawzaw to bring down one of these towers. So this is a better situation for our just economy and well-being. I won't talk about EMP protection, but this system is really designed to be able to mitigate a whole lot of that situation. Next slide. We have some powerful calculators about how much energy we can produce over what amount of time and everything. We have all kinds of ways to put in different assumptions and everything. I mean, Justin's just done a masterful job there. I won't slow down into that, but let's go to the next slide. In a half-scale version, we can have some fun through an area where maybe we want to have the smaller system available and utilizing the water to grow hydroponically off of those systems, water fountains and recreational areas along the way. It just, from a quality of life standpoint, there's some neat benefits here. So, you know, to make vegetation and clean water is a big asset. Next slide. This slide just shows on any road system that we can rain down water because we have plenty of water. And there'll be a little bit more information about this before we end the presentation because there's a lot of pollinators that we need that could use more things to pollinate. So let's talk about that more in a little bit, but this can help with fuel grade crops, food grade crops as well. Let's go to the next slide. This I'm just going to take a second on because this is about turning arid lands into productive lands, not only for humans, but for the planet, really. This is taking dry earth, making water to turn it into producing vegetation, trees, grasses, and nuts. Justin put together an exciting program here to make arid land farmable. We've talked to some people overseas about this as well. And this is called our Grand Arbor system. And the blurb in the upper left says, reforestation carbon sequestration model basis. This is a U.S. Department of Agriculture study that 1 acre of forest absorbs 6 tons of CO2 and releases 4 tons of oxygen. So this arid land to productive land is a very positive thing for our world. Next slide. It's just the Grand Arbor system with a little more recreation tied to it. And let's go to the next slide. I'm going to move quick on these. This is about the money. Let's go to the next slide. Railroads, when they started out, a lot of them were done with railroad bonds way back in the day of the size of two mules side by side. Let's go to the next slide. In virtually any transportation system, there's two types of revenue: transportation and advertising. When you add multimodal transportation, so there's no waiting times, everyone can intersperse. This whole system is IP addressed and runs as packets would run in an IP address system. There's lots of other deliverables: hydrogen, electricity, energy storage, fiber optics, fuel pipelines, liquid waste. And again, our biggest commodity is clean water. Next slide. We have lots of thoughts, and one specific thought about how this benefits everyone, and that is to revenue share, because we'll be utilizing, in a lot of cases, land that's owned by the taxpayers. So we have a program, we won't go into detail now, where we believe revenue sharing across proportionately differently over the federal, state, county, local entities, and then public trusts for medical, education, recreational, and historical foundations that would be legally bound to be paid, and the divvy it up into the local areas would be a legal obligation. Next. So let's just take a look and just say for fun that the Interstate Eisenhower system, which has 54,000 plus miles, were built out. It's a lot of transports, it's a lot of traveler stations, it's a lot of utility substations. It has a big capacity to make watts. It makes BTUs of watts per hour. We have a lot of clean water. We have a big passenger capacity. We have a huge freight capacity. It moves faster. It helps a just-in-time economy. Cost to build is about an average of 10 million per mile, but that's over all the different types of environments you'd be in, and a lot of environments are out in the open. Some aren't, and they're packed more heavily. It generates a big amount of annual public revenue to be distributed, and it's a ton of stainless steel, which lasts for a long time. Next slide. I'm going to hand this over to Justin, and he's going to give you some thoughts on hydrocarbons.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. That's excellent presentation on everything. In this slide, I just want to touch on, the core of our economy, which is energy. Our entire modern industry is built upon, a form of liquid fuel that technically has a copyright trade name, which I'm not going to mention per se, but it is the popular methods, and we just call it a hydrocarbon. Is a naturally occurring chemical bonding between carbon and hydrogen, which is found in crude oil, and we've got a lot of it on this planet. Certainly, there's a lot of things to consider about peak oil, the scarcity, artificial scarcity, the value for the market when it is plentiful and cheap. We all benefit from that. And that's how we get to this day today. The plastic in our carpet, all these things come out of crude oil. But this one slide, I just wanted to touch on what a hydrocarbon is.
Let's advance one slide then for him.
Thanks. Yeah, I can't see it. So
yeah, now you're on your hydrocarbons such as gasoline slide, Justin.
Okay, thank you. So when we first published in 2002, having legacy relationships with the Department of Defense, I was walked into the Tactical Armaments Command for the United States Department of Defense, mostly is Army related, and met with the man in charge of all liquid fuels for all wheel and track vehicles for the military to compare notes. And we utilized two different means with which to calculate chemical equations. So here you see molecular weight calculations, and you can see that a molecule of a hydrocarbon that we might put in our gas tanks at the gas station is made out of 8 carbons and 18 hydrogens. And If you can visualize that as links in a chain. So if you say, you know, I have a piece of chain of 18 links in length, just think of that in your mind. Now, if you were to shorten that chain to something like 4 links in length, you would have a hydrocarbon that we're all familiar with, you know, called natural gas. And there's lots of flavors of that. So there's a range from just a hydrogen atom to 2 hydrogens and a carbon, all the way up to, you know, C8H18, and you go heavier and you get to things like a diesel type fuel, jet fuels and things like that, which are just a little heavier than gasoline. So one of these issues that we all face today, which, you know, of course, is taking up the media for many years, about carbon in the atmosphere, et cetera, the manufacture of carbon dioxide is constant. You know, there are billions of gallons of fuel being burned, billions of cubic meters of natural gas being burned, you know, all for our benefit ultimately. And the more we have in the atmosphere, the more vegetation can grow. But the consumption of oxygen is a deprivation problem that's not being addressed. And by electrolyzing the ocean in mass, or, you know, which again, even 2/3 of the planet is covered in it several miles deep. We can replenish the oxygen content in the atmosphere itself, just make it bigger. I mean, our atmosphere is not quite as thick and dense and full of gases like it used to be. And
Justin, you're cutting out.
sorry, one last comment, that 1 gallon of a hydrocarbon consumes 22 pounds of oxygen out of the atmosphere. So, and we can live with that for now, but when we go to a full hydrogen economy, electrolyzing water from any source, we have the benefit of producing our own oxygen instead of taking it from the atmosphere by using hydrocarbons. So when you oxidize a hydrocarbon, you have to take the oxygen from the atmosphere. If you electrolyze water, you can have a closed system like Jim mentioned, and we're only making our own hydrogen and oxygen and recombining it, and actually adding it to the atmosphere, if we all agree that it's, you know, the best thing to do. But it starts out, you know, with just the first few miles, and as it grows, we all reap the benefits. So that covers my little slide, and I know Jim wants to get to introducing Chris Fetters.
Yeah, let me do that. And I would say the last takeaway from like a layperson standpoint is every single hydrocarbon, the only thing that carries energy in it is the hydrogen. That's where the energy is. The carbon is the dirt after the burn's done in either in the air or water. So I want to turn this over to Chris Fetters. What a wonderful person we got to meet through Sandy Sanders and Jim Nagy, but he's the CEO of Louisiana 23 Development Company. Go ahead, Chris, take it away. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim, and good afternoon, everyone. So my company has a unique involvement in this. We are actually heading up a significant infrastructure project in Louisiana, and we've always viewed Dallas as a sister port to our efforts. Dallas provides just an incredible opportunity of workforce, of land development, and of innovation in and around its metropolitan area. So when I was introduced to these gentlemen, you know, I've been working with Laura Freeland, I've been working with the Commissioner's Office, and obviously had known Dr. Poland for quite some time. And to me, this was a good fit. And really it comes down to something simple to make this happen in Dallas, is that there's a tremendous amount of infrastructure that is going on as Dallas grows out. And as you probably are aware, there's a significant effort underway to construct a new inland port in South Dallas County, as well as serving a lot of the other major industrial developments throughout the county itself. And so for me, when I was introduced to the gentleman at Interstate Traveler, it was an opportunity. The effort that you guys are doing to integrate and kind of expand and create a second version of DART and create this advanced commodities mover, whether it be people or cargo, struck me as an interest, because one of the things that we live by is the moment that you put concrete on the ground, as in a new road or a new highway, you're invested in that asset for at least 50 years. And given the growth projections that Dallas is going under, and especially the growth rate that has happened in the last 10 years, To me, this is an opportunity because as we bring new cargo in, we will generate new jobs. When we generate new jobs, those areas that are currently rural that will require improvements in infrastructure need to be considered to look to the future and not just something that we've been doing for the last 100 years, if not longer. It's time to take a step forward and create a new integrated system. So we're happy to work with the folks in Dallas, with Dr. Poland's group, as well as with Interstate Traveler, to try to bring some of this new advanced technology on. We believe that we can show the commercial need for technology such as this, as well as the engineering feasibility that goes with it. I'm happy to answer any questions, but we were really brought into this as kind of that commercial basis point too. We really see that there's an opportunity here with the engine that you created, Dr. Poland, to drive forward something truly remarkable.
You good,
All right,
Chris?
are we ready for questions at this point?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
Okay. So with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and see what any of you would have for our team here today.
Yeah, I had a few questions. I couldn't, it's Andre Vivodian from College of Engineering, very kind of engineering questions. I couldn't quite understand what the connection between the photovoltaic cells and the hydrogen. Are you saying that you'll use the photovoltaic cells on a rail as a sort of electricity to split the water and generate hydrogen, compress it, and then use it into the fuel cells to run the electricity, to generate electricity? Or maybe I completely missed that part, or maybe it was not, I didn't
Can you
just
hear
get
that,
that.
Justin?
Where the hydrogen come from, what the solar cells are doing, and how does it all connected from the technical perspective?
Yes. Hi, Andre. This is Justin Sutton.
Yeah.
Happy to answer your question. And it's the ideal question, actually. It is the nuts and bolts, the heart and lungs of the system. It all begins with the solar skin on top of the rail. And we try to impress on people how large the system is. When we run the rail down the interstate highway, all of our estimates are parallel track. So we have track on both sides of the interstate. So it generates a solar panel that is essentially 16 feet wide by 5,280 feet in length per mile, which is about 84,000 some odd square feet, which has the ability to generate about 1 million watts per hour per mile of rail. So if we have 100 miles of rail from noon till 1 on any sunny day, we have 100 megawatts of electrical potential from noon till 1. And to sink that energy into something that we can pull it out of, chemical batteries are not feasible. The ability to produce hydrogen through electrolysis in large bulk, quantities is handled in the utility substations that are every 3 miles. So each utility substation has the ability to absorb anywhere from 3 to 10, megawatts an hour and generate anywhere from 10 to 30 megawatts in output, because we can output the energy faster than we can collect it. There is energy losses and all of that stuff associated with it. It's all in the extensive calculation. It's really quite simple, but the amount of energy it takes.
So on that substation, you split the water, generate the hydrogen. Then what? What happens to hydrogen at that moment after?
Well, initially it's stored as a compressor.
So you need to compress it, right? So you store,
Yeah.
you need to compress it, liquidize it, right?
Yeah. Well, liquidation would come through a separate process. We don't necessarily need to do that.
Right. Okay. But compressing.
Okay. To do that, because compression for liquefaction is very energy intensive. So we use something called a condensate using an ADR magnetic system, electromagnetic system that generates a thermal heat sink that could actually crystallize hydrogen into a solid. You can look up ADR demagnetization of a salt, and you can learn about it. We have information that we can share on that as well. But that's a deep subject that we really don't need to touch on. Now, the storage of the hydrogen, as Jim mentioned, is low pressure, and the volume in the pipeline is quite large. So if you consider, again, 1 mile of rail going down the interstate, that's both sides, there are 4 33-inch diameter pipelines dedicated to low pressure hydrogen storage, which is an incredibly large volume of hydrogen gas. So, and that just populates the pipeline and can be tapped off anywhere and compressed and sold anywhere. Essentially, you know, we become a backbone for other hydrogen producers as well. So if anybody has extra electrons they want to sell, say a windmill that's working, you know, we'll be able to take in intermittent power and normalize.
So you're saying you'll store hydrogen in one of those conduit pipes along that rail. Okay, all right. So then what? You'll take it out and send it to a fuel cell to generate electricity?
Yes, the utility substation has all of that included in the one building so that they can operate independently of each other, and they would also work together.
So you generate the fuel cells and electricity, and then you're using the electricity to use on the rail for the magnetic field generation.
Correct.
I have a lot of technical questions on challenges from both efficiency, sustainability, safety, and all other aspects I didn't hear in the presentations covered in here. It is one thing when the DoD is using it for the rockets, but another thing when you put it in a consumer market, and the car industry, including Toyota, etc., did run into several of these issues. I'm a materials person, by the way, and I know how much industry would like to move to the hydrogen fuel, and a lot of problems with the hydrogen interacting with materials and make them brittle and make them all other issues, which is still in work in progress. But say, for example, in the fuel cells, one of the things which is kind of stagnating the fuel cell cars on the roads, because you remember like 5 years or 10 years ago was a big push, whatever, by putting a fuel cell car on the roads. One thing which came out, the catalysis, the conversion, the materials which they're using in batteries in fuel cell is a platinum based, and it is very expensive, and there's not enough. And for the search for efficient catalysis, and we couldn't, you know, it was kind of minimal success on that. But and just bringing that devil in the details, what I'm saying, in the technical. So I'd like to see more of this kind of this technical points addressed, how you're going to solve them all. So storage,
Sure, well,
because you put it in conduit and going to store that. What if it's going to brittle and it cracks and it generates you know, fire hazards right there, and for the public.
Andre, I can assure you that the hydrogen embrittlement issue has been greatly exaggerated. Just basic K bottles, steel K bottles that you can store, you know, oxygen or acetylene in, they don't leak. I mean, if you're doing a cryogenic cycling of a metal, yes, you're going to get microfractures when you cryogenically cycle a metal. We're not doing that. It's not a problem for us.
Okay. Michael, you had a question.
I sure do. Quite impressed with the vision since intended. And so when we look at this contract and if we could figure out a way to solve the technical nuances that have just been brought up at this point in time, I think that NSF is how do we solve the futuristic logistics solutions bring together all of the things that would better society and our world, move the United States to the next level. So I think that this is a very impressive idea. Thinking about, you got any existing contracts right now? You have existing sites left, or is this still in paper?
Michael, I think we're having a hard time. We're getting a lot of static when you're talking.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Yeah, this,
I couldn't make, I was working real hard to make it out and I couldn't, it's real, you had some real heavy static and it was pretty persistent.
I
least
I think I understand what he's asking, you know, is basically saying, is this just pretty pictures or is this real science? And this is something that, you know, is quite common when people are first introduced to this. And, you know, I'll go back to the beginning in March 19th, 1995. You can see my original handwritten notes in pencil, which are available on our website, interstatetraveler.us. Yeah, it was just an idea in 1995, which is quite a long time ago. When I published in the year of 2002, this was done after the United States Air Force had published full sustainable infrastructure capacity at Joint Base Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, under the leadership of Senator Inoue and the HCAT program, or the Hawaii Center for Advanced Transportation Technology. I'd mentioned earlier that I'd had direct parlay with the United States Military Tactical Armaments Command, specifically about the production of hydrogen and the consumption of it in internal combustion engines and jet turbines, etc. So what we're doing is integrating existing technology. The only thing that's new and novel is the ball joint cantilever suspension system and nacelle arrangement for the maglev rail system on top of the conduit cluster box beam structure that supports the maglev and the solar network. That's unique. So we're not sitting here saying that we're going to build fuel cells or internal combustion engines when we can buy them from dozens of vendors. We're not in that business. We're in the integration business of existing technology. So, you know, just keep that in mind when you contemplate what you see with the Interstate Traveler.
Okay, is my voice?
Still fuzzy.
Thanks.
Sorry, Michael. If you have a question, why don't you try the chat? Okay, any other questions for our gentleman today?
Hey, this is Laura Freeland. I guess, you know, the one thing I'd be curious about is it sounds like, you know, can you tell us through the next steps, like what you were hoping for out of this call, what you were looking for next step, what kind of partnership, what can you just speak to that?
Yeah, Jim, you want to jump on that?
So this is simply an introductory building foundation base. We're not presumptuous that everything happens out of this, but we're very happy with some people that we're working with in the whole TEXOMA region. And then it got paid off with being able to talk to a bigger group in the TEXOMA area with this call. So we want to explore jointly with some next steps, and between Chris Fetters and some other people that had brought us down there, there's some things working. There's some things working to have a full-scale demonstration totally built of this with all the integration done. And that's the phase we're in, and we're encouraged about it. I'll be real frank about it. When we first talked with Sandy and Chris and Jim Nagy, who introduced us, is we have a place to build a full-scale demo. Now we've talked about complementing that contiguously in the TEXOMA area. There's talks about waterport improvements utilizing this system, some excitement about it. But then the whole Dallas and TEXOMA area came into it. So we're an open book as to forming relationships where we can answer all those questions in depth. We weren't going to attempt to do it in a call like this because there's just a lot of detailed questions people have. We were fortunate. I just had lunch 2 weeks ago with Dr. Addison Bain, who was a founder of the American Hydrogen Association and International Hydrogen Association for Energy. He's retired now. He wrote a letter about this project. He testified in front of Congress. He was the guy that got, you know, some of these questions. There was he's in the Hall of Fame about on virtually every monument on the Space Coast. But he wrote a letter about this, and he says in his payoff line that this will be a great advantage to the states and countries which adopt this system. He was the safety guy that wrote the safety manuals. He understands low pressure stuff. He's been fueling a car since the latter 80s by hydrogen he makes himself in his garage. He's had so many interviews. He's testified in front of Congress about hydrogen. He got the plaque changed in the Smithsonian Institute next to a replica of the Hindenburg that said within the plaque it's hydrogen exploded. That's not at all what happened. He got that corrected. It literally took an act of Congress. That phrase we all hear as kids, that'll take an act of Congress to get that done. Well, he did that. It's all documented. And that's something we will give Dr. Poland a copy of, so he has that. So we can go into a much more detailed thing to answer questions of things that people may have concerns about, and then get on to the talk of how can we implement this? Where does it help? It's a better mousetrap, and we probably will end up, it's been suggested to us that we take a tri-state area, which is where Kentucky, Ohio, Indiana converge. That's where Jim Nagy and I grew up. I'm back living there after 40 years in Detroit, but we have a team in place down in Texas, so we might see if there's some synergies there to get some scalability even here from a money standpoint. So that's really kind of where we're at without, elaborating way too long and talking too much right now.
Yeah, no, I love that, because it certainly helps to kind of know that, kind of get the science behind us, and kind of answering the questions Andre had, and maybe even Michael. And then there's a lot of players here in this area that would be very interested in kind of using that as the next steps, like the Michael Morrises of the world. I'm sure you were thinking of that as well, Terry. So there's a lot of good people to include later.
Yeah, and I'm even thinking what we should probably be thinking about is putting a concept together. Let's just pick South Dallas, where we have a concept where you're showing containers coming out of the Union Pacific yard, moving over the system, dropping them off at a distribution center, kind of making a loop through South Dallas, and then showing, hey, we don't have trucks on the road. We're producing water. We're producing electricity in excess of our requirements. We're not producing noise. We're not, no emissions. I think that's the kind of concept that is going to be it's going to take to sell this. And then what kind of jobs does this create? So I know we've got quite a few people dropping off here, so we probably should be drawing this to a conclusion, but I think you've given us a really big idea. I see this as a great opportunity to start figuring out, okay, how can we, collaborate and work together on something like this? So let's start thinking about what would be some next steps and how we can collaborate.
That sounds excellent to me and to all of us here at the Interstate Traveler Company. We've got proposals all over the world, and the team that is first to market is going to benefit the most. We look forward to that day, and this whole Dallas area, I am very excited about it. So let's get together and talk about some routes and some suggestions, like you said. Thanks, Doc.
Okay. All right. Well, Lauren, you can go ahead and stop the recording. I think what we'll also do is we'll be making sure this gets circulated. I expected to see a larger group at